I'm sorry I left you on such a cliffhanger last week, but I need to give you a reason to come back. Perhaps, now you've got to know us all a little better, I may tell you a little more about myself and my friends. I suppose it depends on who survives. If you recall, I left us in a room which had, until recently, been filled with goblins. A raging Korac had dispatched a few, but the rest had fled. We stood, 3 of us pretty injured, in a small, squalid room, tense and alert, unsure whether the goblins would return with waves of reinforcements, or if we were, for the moment at least, as safe as one can be deep within a goblin-infested dragon cult headquarters. Korac, still raging, wasted no time in opening the door. Seeing that getting in his way would be a risky move, Tethlis chose to hang back, ready with his hand axes. The door was barred with a thick piece of wood, but Korac smashed through it like a matchstick. He felt the rage drain away as it opened to reveal a short corridor, bending down to the right. After getting the all-clear from Korac, Tethlis used his wood elf speed to make it to the door at the other end of this newly discovered room. Gergus glanced through the open doorway, noting that the floor was dusty, and the only recent tracks seemed to be those of giant rats. Still waiting in the other room with me, Elrohir picked up the sound of feral goblin drumbeats. Primal screams, much like my own singing, accompanied the menacing beat. We could hear Urki calling for help, Meepo's cries also audible from the dragon hall. Elrohir quickly made his way into the hall, arrow nocked. He was greeted by the sight of a goblin shaman engaged in a fray with Urki. The shaman was partially covered by a pillar, but the firing of the arrow was enough to cause her to flee. I stopped looting the bodies and ran to join Elrohir. Meepo was pointing at a door further back the way we'd come, away from the door, but my attention was drawn to some strange-looking shrubs sprouting either side of the western door. It was not a good situation. The 3 melee fighters of our group a distance away from the squishier members. Once we had all regrouped in the dragon hall, Meepo told us he'd found the dragon totem, Calcrix, and was eager for us to follow him to reclaim it. Most of us followed Meepo, Korac hanging back near the area where the shaman had been popping in and out. Gergus held a position between him and the rest of us. We could feel the chill emanating from under the door, and a faint, misty aura hung in the air. Elrohir, as a ranger, was about to inform us that white dragons like to hunt and can be very vain. Gergus, insightful fellow that he is, could tell by the numerous scars on Meepo's body that Calcrix wasn't exactly enthusiastic about being kept in a cage and worshipped by the kobolds. Tethlis tried to get Meepo to give up more information about Calcrix, and we were told that he had nasty claws and a terrible temper. I'm sure some of my exes might say that about me. The best way to soothe him was with an offering. Tethlis glanced at the numerous goblin corpses, whilst Elrohir reminded us that we would be dealing with a chaotic and evil beast. I quietly suggested that we could investigate the shrubbery I'd spotted previously instead. Meepo wanted to send Korac in, but Korac was resolutely guarding the gap in the wall. Tethlis made it clear to Meepo that Korac was watching his hole, and so there would be no shifting him. Meepo, desperate to get to the dragon, began pulling on the door. Even the usually confident Tethlis was reluctant to approach the dragon, the memory of his battalion having been wiped out by one at the forefront of his mind. Gergus began to move to inspect the shrubs, but Urki warned him that he thought they may be pets of the outcast, Belak. Korac shouted into the hole, "Coward!" Elrohir, carrying one of the flaming torches from the walls, carefully approached the plants. It was in his mind that these may be twig blights, the creatures he had come down in pursuit of. He watched carefully, seeing if there was any reaction when the flame drew close to them. He held the torch as Korac moved closer to defend his friend if necessary. Elrohir, emboldened by this, tried to be as intimidating as his delicate half-elf form could be towards the plants. He thought he saw the nearest one trying to bend away from the flame. As he leaned even closer, one suddenly popped up and attacked him, no longer rooted to the ground. The fight was on. Elrohir, being closest, was the first to land a blow, swiping with the torch at what he was now certain was a twig blight. The vicious little shrub, able to move around, burst into flames, flailing as it aimlessly ran about helplessly. His hands now free, Elrohir drew his short sword and struck at it again. The fragile wooden body split into two as Tethlis called out, "Why don't you stick around?" I suppose you had to be there. The other twig blights began to come to life as Elrohir grabbed a second torch, ready to attack. Whilst this was going on, Tethlis was inspecting the central door from the Dragon Hall. Finding it unlocked and assuming that the twig blights were being taken care of, he opened it, this time only pretending to kick it in so as not to suffer the same embarrassment as last time he faced off against a door. This revealed another short corridor, this one curving to the left. Being as sneaky as he could, he crept into the hall, the banging and clattering of his swords clearly declaring his presence. He wasn't able to see much, but he could hear some noise coming from further down the passageway. I noticed him go, the others occupied with the wannabe Triffids. His dark vision enabled him to make out a huge, hulking shape around the corner. Just then, he felt thorny pricks in his bum and a sharp pain in his head as he fell unconscious. Oblivious to the perilous situation of Tethlis, Korac smashed one of the twig blights into oblivion with his great axe, then moved to destroy another. Not wanting to suffer the fate of its companions, the twig blight retaliated, jabbing him sharply in the face. A second twig blight made a move on Elrohir, which he nimbly dodged. Gergus was about to blast at the two remaining twig blights with the sacred flame, but as he turned, he caught my eye and noticed my expression. He paused, and I whipped out a piece of copper wire, forming it into a U-shape and holding it to my ear like a phone. Whatever that is. I whispered a message to Tethlis, getting increasingly worried as my cantrip got no response. I shouted to everyone that I thought Tethlis was in danger and followed him into the open doorway and the passage beyond. Hearing this, Gergus dashed up behind me, overtaking me as Urki came speeding round the corner. The light from Gergus's great axe cast enough brightness for him to spot a giant rat scurrying into the shadows, and in the ensuing silence he heard the sound of something being dragged away further into the citadel. Meanwhile, Elrohir was wrenching another sconce free, dodging the attacks the twig blights launched at him. Holding it aloft, he swept the flame towards them and followed through with his sword, neither finding their mark. He stood his ground, hemming them in so Korac could make his attack. Korac sliced through another twig blight like a hot knife through butter, leaving a small pile of sticks in his wake as he made his way towards the northern door, still closed, and waited. The two surviving twig blights launched at Elrohir, injuring him badly. Gergus made his way further into the corridor, now catching sight of something being dragged by larger goblins and rats. He shot a sacred flame, creating an instant rat kebab. Urki, the gnome paladin we had rescued, ran after him, but neither of us were able to get close enough to attack. Urki called on his god, Pelor, and Korac, Gergus, and I felt the warmth of his blessing wash over us. It's at this point, my friend, that I'm going to have to pause this tale. Oh, I know it's mean, But I need to make sure you come back now, don't I?
You better hope and pray that you'll make it safe back to your own world. You better hope and pray that you'll wake one day in your own world. 'Cause when you sleep at night, they don't hear your cries in your own world. Only time will tell if you can break the spell back in your own world.